Right before we jump into this video, if you want to take better pictures in only 11 days, I created a free mini video course called 11 Days to Better Photography, and you can get it right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/11 days. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a comparison between the Nikon D7500 and the Canon 80D. Now, before you say, Jared, the Canon 80D is a year older, you would be correct, but it is the current matchup in the Nikon versus Canon market. The D7500 and the 80D are basically priced at the same thing. I also want to note that we have stand-in models here because we don't actually have an 80D or a D7500 sitting here, so let's take a look at the specs right now. The Nikon D7500 has a 20.9 megapixel DX format CMOS sensor, whereas the 80D has more megapixels at 24.2 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor. Now, which one gets the check mark in this case? I'm gonna go with the Nikon because it's newer. The newer sensors tend to be better and give you better quality even with less megapixels. We'll talk about that more as we move on to some of the other specs. Now, moving on to the image processors, the Nikon has what's called an Expeed 5, whereas the Canon has a Digic 6. Canon is also up to Digic 7 in some of their newer cameras, and that's what processes the files inside of the camera. This is more of a toss-up, so I can't give a check mark to anybody in this case. Now we can talk about ISO because this is where you're going to see some major differences. Being that the Nikon D7500 has the Nikon D500 sensor in it, it goes from ISO 100 to 51,200, expandable to 1.64 million in high 5. That's a huge range. The Canon goes from 100 to 16,000, expandable to 25,600. So the Nikon is about a stop and a half better, and it's much newer. And I know from personal experience with using both the D500 and the 80D that the new sensor in this D7500 is pretty darn good at higher ISOs. I honestly haven't seen a DX camera handle high ISOs as well as that new sensor that's in the D500 as well as this D7500. So check mark goes to the Nikon. Moving on to frames per second, the Nikon does 8 frames a second, the Canon does 7 frames a second. Slight advantage to the Nikon there for shooting more frames, so it gets a partial check mark, Stephen, just a partial check mark for 1 frame better. Now, when we move on to autofocusing points, the Nikon is 51-point AF system with 15 cross-type sensors. The Canon is 45-point all cross-type. Now, cross-types are much better for getting focus when you're out in the edges or when you're in the in-betweens where the cross-types used to not be. So Canon has done a great job updating their autofocus systems. They've gotten extremely good, especially with all cross-types. Now, with the Nikon, you have 51 points with the 15 cross-types. It's still partly a toss-up because Nikon only has 15 of the cross-type sensors, but it does have 51 total focusing points. It's a nice focusing system. I think this one is more of a toss-up, so no check marks to anybody on that. In terms of the highest shutter speed that you can do, they both do 1/8,000th of a second, which is what most of the pro cameras out on the markets do. These are more in the consumer end. In terms of burst rate, the Nikon can shoot 50 frames in a row in RAW, and the Canon can only do 25 in a row in RAW. Now, to be fair, you're probably not shooting more than 25 frames in a row to outrun the buffer, but in this case, the Nikon getting 50, yep, that gets the check mark right there. Moving on to the video specs, the Nikon does 4K UHD up to 30 frames a second, and the Canon does 1080 at 60 frames. It also offers All-I, which is a higher bit rate than some of the other cameras out there. Now, if you're looking for just something that does 4K, this one's easy for you. You would think about using the Nikon or going up and spending even more money on, say, a 5D Mark IV, or possibly looking to a Sony if that's what you're looking to do. So in this case, it's still kind of a toss-up because the Canon does a great job with video, but if 4K is the name of the game, then obviously the one that does 4K would be better for you. In terms of autofocus when it comes to video, clear winner here is Canon. It offers what's called dual pixel AF. The Nikon offers face detection. Not very good. It's slower, it's not as good, but the dual pixel AF, you cannot beat dual pixel AF. You can touch the back of the screen and the focus will shift smoothly and cinematically. The Canon definitely gets the check mark for the autofocus when it comes to video. Now, both of these cameras have Wi-Fi and NFC capabilities. They both have headphones as well as microphone jacks, and they both have 100% viewfinder coverage, meaning what you see in the viewfinder when you take the picture is what you're going to see in the final image. In terms of screens, the D7500 has a 3.2-inch touch screen that is tilting. It's just under 1 million dots, and the Canon has a 3-inch vari-angle touchscreen, which allows you to rotate it almost all the way around, which is great if you're doing vloggity style videos or anything where you want to tilt the screen forward for all that matters, because the Nikon only allows you to tilt it this way and this way. It doesn't let you rotate it. This is still a toss-up. Some people, like if you're doing vlogging, will love the fact that you can rotate the screen and hold it out like this and still be able to see yourself, where you wouldn't be able to do that on the Nikon. I'm still calling this one a coin flip, so that's up to you guys to figure out. In terms of some other buttons, neither of these have a joystick for changing the focusing points quickly. They do have up, up, down, down, left, right, D-pads, so you can move focusing points that way. In terms of grips, you can get a vertical grip or a battery grip for the 80D, but Nikon has decided not to have a grip for the D7500. So if that's a big deal for you, obviously the one that takes the grip would be the one that you would take there. Memory card slots, they each have one SD card slot, so that's exactly the same right there. The batteries are going to give you pretty similar battery life. Moving on to weight, the Nikon weighs 1.41 pounds, and the Canon weighs just a little more at 1.6 pounds, and the Nikon is priced at $1,246.95 because it's newer, and the Canon is just under $1,100. But there's still two tests that are extremely important. It's the sniff test and the wind tunnel test. Here we go. Smells like Bert. Smells like Ernie. Bert and Ernie. I don't know which one gets the check mark because I actually liked, which one had the bigger nose? I don't even remember which one was Bert and which one was Ernie. I don't know. Wind tunnel test time. The winner of the wind tunnel test, Canon. I don't know why, just because I think it's a little shorter. So there you have it, guys. You need to decide which camera is right for you. So let's do a quick recap to help you figure out which one is the one that you could go with. The Nikon is a year newer, and I think it has a better sensor and better high ISO capability than the Canon. If you're doing more stills in terms of photos and not as much video, but you still want to do video because you have 4K, the Nikon is a great option. If you're primarily doing video and you want to stick with the Canon ecosystem, because ecosystems are important to decide at this point, are you going to want to stick with Nikon? Are you going to want to stick with Canon and grow? Because the lens options are pretty much the same on each. If you're just flat out doing video and don't need 4K starting out, the dual pixel AF makes the decision a little easier, especially for video. Now, if you're gonna lock it off on a tripod the whole time, I may be leaning towards overall the Nikon in that case for stills and for video, because you don't need to worry about that autofocus as much, especially if all you're going to do is manually focus it for video. So what do you guys think? Leave some comments down below with which camera you would go with. And I also want to say, being that we're talking about camera gear, how do you organize and protect your gear? Well, if you don't know how, I created a free app called My Gear Vault, the best way to input, organize, and protect your gear. And it's absolutely free, and it's available in the Apple App Store right now and will be available at the end of June 2017 for Android. So again, this is a free app. Download it, give it a try. I think you will absolutely love using it, and that's where I'll leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.